Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Josie Peplinski, and I am a political science honors student at UNCC, as well as a secondary education student. Education policy has certainly been in the news over the past 2 years more than ever. The coronavirus pandemic has presented a natural experiment for us to further study the role of student poverty. Creating an equal educational opportunity for all students is so important, and creating a safe, accessible environment for the students to attend is step one of that process. Therefore, today I will discuss how school attendance rates lowered during the coronavirus pandemic and how student poverty affected that decrease. It has long been established that students who attend class more frequently have higher academic performance. Here I have inserted research from Educational Research Quarterly Journal that demonstrates this finding nicely. In fourth grade classes in Ohio, the students in the top 10% for proficiency tests have an average attendance of 96.4%, while the students in the bottom 10% have an average attendance rate of 92.75%. It is clear that attendance is the first step towards helping students succeed. Attendance rates are historically lower for students in poverty. However, there have been several challenges over the coronavirus pandemic that have made attendance even more difficult for low-income families than usual. Firstly, caregiver barriers have been escalated. Middle and upper class families are more likely to have caregivers who were able to work from home during the pandemic, while lower class families are more likely to be essential workers. Knowing when and how to log into class without caregiver assistance is a challenge. Among students who may have had a caregiver home with them, low-income families are more likely to live in multi-generational households with an elderly caregiver assisting them with schoolwork. Older people may have a more difficult time navigating online schooling if they have less exposure to technology. There are even more challenges for families who primarily speak a language other than English. Communicating with teachers in the school about when and how to get online for class and which assignments to complete is very difficult. This brings us to the challenge of synchronous versus asynchronous learning. Before the pandemic, caregivers knew when their student was in class, drop off at 8 a.m. and pick up at 3 p.m. each day. During the pandemic, many schools have implemented a hybrid versus completely virtual, or simply a synchronous with live instruction versus asynchronous, independent, not live instruction format. It could be challenging for caregivers and students to keep track of when they should go to the physical school building, when they should log on to a video streaming platform, or when they are expected to engage in independent learning. The biggest challenge for attendance during virtual learning is the digital divide. The term digital divide refers to how some people have greater access to information through technology than others. 7.3 million students across the country do not have a computer. Even more do not have reliable internet access. Students who are in foster care, who are homeless, who are English learners, or who are low income are most likely to be the students without the technology they need to attend their online classes. In an effort to be understanding of all these challenges, schools relaxed their attendance policies during virtual learning. With more absences to work with before consequences occur, students and caregivers may not prioritize attendance as much as in previous years. Let's begin by looking at this data by jumping into the simple statistic that prompted this study. The mean attendance in September 2019 for North Carolina public schools was 95.964%. The curve resembles a normal distribution, and the minimum value was 75%. Jumping ahead to September 2020, the mean attendance dropped by over a percentage point to 94.873%. The results now resemble a left-leaning curve with a minimum value of 60%. I hypothesized that poverty rates could help explain the decreasing attendance. Low-income families face unique challenges to attending virtual classrooms that middle and upper-class families are less likely to face. To examine this hypothesis, I analyzed all public elementary schools in North Carolina with fourth grade classrooms. The unit of analysis for this study is schools. My independent variable is the percentage of low-income students at each school. This data is gathered by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, or NCDPI, and A low-income family is defined as a family with an income below the poverty line. The average percentage of low-income students at a school is 60.254%, and it ranges anywhere from 0% to 100%. My dependent variable is the percent change in attendance between September 2019 and September 2020 at each elementary school. To create this statistic, I gathered data from the principal's monthly reports on NCDPI. I subtracted the 2019 average daily attendance from the 2020 average daily attendance, each for the month of September. Therefore, if attendance decreased between the 2 years, the result would be negative. In addition to these main variables, I also implemented some control variables. I controlled for whether a school implemented a hybrid or virtual format. I also controlled for whether schools provided devices for classroom use before the pandemic, and whether students brought those devices home. I also thought it would be important to control for the percentage of beginning teachers in a classroom, defined in the 2019 NCDPI dataset as being within their first 3 years of teaching. I felt that feeling safe in their learning environment could additionally affect attendance. Therefore, I controlled for criminal acts per 1,000 students and bullying occurrences per 1,000 students. Additionally, I controlled for per pupil expenditure. All these control variables came from 2018 or 2019 NCDPI datasets. Let me begin by simply showing you what attendance looks like when correlated with the percentage of low-income students in a typical academic year. Here you can see a slightly negative trend. For every percentage increase in low-income students in 2019, attendance decreased by 0.012 percentage points when considering all relevant control variables in a multivariate regression analysis. Here, we see a much more obvious negative trend in 2020. For every percentage increase in low-income students in 2020, attendance decreased by 0.059 percentage points when considering all other control variables in a multivariate regression analysis. Here, I have a correlation between the percentage of low-income students and the change in attendance between 2019 and 2020. Again, you can see a downward trend. I decided to create this variable because previous literature has already demonstrated that poverty affects attendance. The purpose of my research is to determine if poverty affects attendance more during virtual learning than it does in typical academic years. The previous regressions have demonstrated that this prediction is justified. Poverty had a larger effect on 2020 attendance than in 2019. And the schools with higher poverty rates had a larger decrease in attendance between the 2 years as compared to schools with lower poverty rates. Here I have my multivariate regression analysis showing that every percentage increase in low-income students, attendance decreased from 2019 to 2020 by 0.051 percentage points when considering all control variables we've discussed. Among the statistically significant control variables were bullying occurrences. More bullying occurrences actually led to increased attendance. Perhaps students felt safer attending online school. Per pupil expenditure has a slightly negative effect on the change in attendance, likely because low-income schools receive a bit more funding as they have higher needs. Finally, when students had access to devices in class before the pandemic, it did not increase virtual attendance rates as expected. Rather, it caused attendance to decrease between 2019 and 2020 by 0.745 percentage points, which was an unexpected result. According to the R-squared value, all the variables account for 15.8% of the factors influencing the change in attendance between 2019 and 2020. A significant control variable which I would like to study further is the percentage of beginning teachers in the school. Here you can see an obvious negative correlation between 2020 attendance and the percentage of beginning teachers. With every percentage increase in beginning teachers, the attendance between the 2 years decreased by 0.058 percentage points when considering all control variables in the multivariate regression analysis. New teachers may not have as effective caregiver outreach methods to address attendance problems, perhaps. Unfortunately, there are still limitations to this study. There are always reporting accuracy problems when we ask the schools to report these numbers for themselves. Additionally, there are outliers in the data set that skew the results. Finally, I would have loved to have more control variables. I believe that whether a school resides in an urban or rural area is an important factor that I was not able to measure at this time. Even as many schools move to in-person learning, the nature of education has changed forever in the course of the pandemic. More schools have discovered useful online learning softwares that they would like to continue to use for homework assignments. Therefore, the digital divide will be the next big hurdle for low-income students to overcome. Politicians should work to increase home technology and internet access for low-income students in order to support their learning. In the meantime, teachers and administration should design alternative assignments and attendance options for students without strong internet access. If you would like to read more about my research so far, including some other measures of poverty that I have used as the independent variable, please take a look at my paper and see my references here. I would like to give a big thank you to Dr. Giersch for being my mentor through all of this, working with me every week since last January, as well as Dr. Harden and Dr. McGowan for their hard work reviewing my paper. Thank you all so much for being here and listening.